class soon, so we're just doing one video today. Today we're doing one called Frame, so let's get started.
However, it felt very bleak at the sheds. Oh, right now, the last steam engine to run on the mainland would have pulled into Liverpool Lime Street right now, sighed Henry sadly. Over on the mainland, the other railway had conducted a special train to say farewell to steam engines once and for all. But it was worse than that. Not only that, but us steam engines aren't allowed on the main line since they placed a ban on steam engines. That should be a crime, said Henry indignantly. It's good that the contract to use Barron Furnace had stayed intact. But despite that, without us steam engines, there wouldn't be a railway. Well, I do understand your feelings, interjected Boko. But us diesels are the way of the future. We are faster, cleaner, and more modern. Henry and James esteemed loudly. You? Modern? My dear Boko, your kind is nothing but a failure. I remember your first day here on Sodor. Your windows have been rattling to the point where they fell off. Not to mention your noisy engine and nasty fumes, added James. Boko was furious. I may have had those faults before, but I've been fixed. But since we're talking about failures, I seem to hear that you, Henry, had a failed shape, and you, James, had wooden brakes that were once on fire. Now James and Henry were cross. Well, at least we aren't engines who take our kind to the scrapyard, retorted James. Quite right, James. I can't believe that the Fat Controller bought a diesel to help us. Steam engines should be the only mode of power to help on this railway. The three engines argued until Gordon had had enough. Be quiet, he snapped. You two leave Boko alone. He hadn't been causing any trouble to us here. Sympathizer, muttered James crossly.
Skipping the intro because I don't want to get in trouble with copyright claims.
Why the long face? Asked Edward kindly. Then Boko told Edward about the night before. Pay no attention to them, Boko. The emotion of the last train from yesterday and the steam ban is just getting to them. They'll have to accept it sooner or later. Anyway, I best be off. The Fat Controller wants me to collect some trucks at the big station and bring them back to the branch line. Goodbye, Boko, he said, and he puffed away. A few hours went by, and Edward hadn't returned yet with the empty trucks. Boko began to worry. He went around the yard asking for any engine that may have seen him, but none had any knowledge. Later, the dockyard manager came to see him. Boko, I needed to take some empty trucks to the shunting yard at Knapford. Yes, sir. But Edward? What about Edward? Isn't he coming back? Soon, I imagine, replied the dock manager. Now on your way now, please. So Boko did as he was told.
Sorry guys, I was just setting up my...
He rolled along the branch line to find him along the way. But he couldn't. He arrived at a red signal and stopped. Where is he thought. Just then, Henry raced by with the express. Henry, he called. Have you seen Edward anywhere? Push off, shouted Henry as he sped down the line. Boko growled.
Clean kitchen.
He saw James at the shunting yard pushing some trucks about. Boko asked him if he had seen Edward, but James just snorted away at his steam at the big green diesel. Some engines, he growled. Henry and James were at the sheds and talked nothing but Boko. Paul, Edward, Neville and Rebecca, remarked Henry. They have to deal with that big green log all day. All day they have to think if he's superior to them. Did he ask you about Edward? James asked. Yes, replied Henry. He asked me if I had seen him. Come to think of it, I had seen him collecting some trucks. He said he was going to take them to the... But before James could say anything else, he saw Douglas puffing past pulling a train of scrap iron. Both Henry and James gulped at the sight, and then they thought of something. Do you think he's... No, of course not. You know full well that the Fat Controller would never have such a thought, especially towards Edward. Then they heard a clang, and as Douglas's train passed them,
Uh-oh!
they saw a blue wheel lying beside the track.
Ah!
Both Henry and James felt sick from seeing it. "Now I do think of it," said Henry, who had found his voice. Later, Boko arrived at the big station. As he coupled to his trucks, Henry and James cruised quietly beside Boko on each side of the track. Boko jumped. "Oh, it's you two. What are you doing here?" "We know what you're up to," said James. "What? Don't play dumb with us, Boko," replied Henry crossly. "We know all about your game." "What are you talking about?" replied Boko confusingly. "You told us that diesels are the future, and today we saw a wheel from Douglas's scrap train." "So?" "So?" shrieked James crossly. "So that wheel happens to be Edward's, you know." Boko gasped in disbelief. He then realized what the two were implying, and he got cross from the idea. "Are you two saying that I was responsible for scrapping Edward?" "Yes!" snapped Henry
Cooper,
and
stop.
James crossly. "Oh, for goodness sake, how dense are you two?" Then they started an argument, and a workman telephoned Sir Charles. The engines argued more and more until they heard a familiar whistle. "Hello," called Edward cheerfully. James and Henry were surprised. Boko, however, was pleased. "Edward, where have you been?" "I was held up at the harbor here when I was to take my empties, because Samson had something wrong inside him." "Well, what are you doing here?" asked Henry and James nervously.
Free living room.
"Sir Charles had asked me to take him here." "Indeed," replied a voice. "Workmen have been complaining that you three engines were causing a disturbance. I'd like to know what it's all about." Then the three engines replied all at once. "One at a time, please," called Sir Charles. Then Boko explained. "Well, sir, these two thought I scrapped Edward because of a blue wheel from Douglas's scrap train. I guess they were miffed because I said diesels are the future. I was only being honest." "Is this true?" Sir Charles asked as he stared towards him. "Yes, sir," they replied. "And was it because of what happened yesterday on the mainland?" "Yes, sir." Well, yesterday was a sad day for steam, but Boko is right. Diesels are the way of the future right now. But unlike the mainland, I do see the usefulness of both modes of power. However, Boko, I think you should be more careful with your words next time when it comes to the subject of diesels. Some people could take a word as something rather pompous."
Thank you!
"Yes, sir. I would love to say
Thank
more
you.
engines, but sadly I can't. But I'll never have Edward suffer the same fate. I thought you and Henry should have known that by now, and not framed someone for any wrongdoing.
Yeah, Trooper, what you gonna
After
do?
all,
What you gonna do?
You two and Gordon had done that to Duck when Diesel came here a few years ago.
What you gonna do? Huh?
When Sir Charles
Huh?
left, Henry,
What are you
James,
gonna
and
do?
Boko went about their work quietly. Later that day, Boko arrived at the sheds on the main line. Henry and James were there too, feeling sorry. Boko knew they were sorry, but he didn't accept their apology straight away. But as the days passed, Boko could see that they had stuck to their word. Although James still had his words against diesels on the mainland, he got his own back years later.
Take the dogs out.
But the three engines were great friends and still are today.
Well, that's all for today, guys. My class is starting, so I gotta go. I'll see you all in the next video. This is Cabra 101 signing out. Adios, everybody.